Shalom from Jerusalem. This is Watchmen Talk, a series of conversations with Israeli military intelligence and diplomatic experts and practitioners. And our special guest today for two conversations is Reserve Major General Guy Tzur. Welcome.
Thank you.
A former commander of the Israeli Defense Forces ground forces, as well as a divisional commander during the Second Lebanon War almost 17 years ago, and a veteran armor commander, among other duties on the General Staff and in the Southern Command. We will go over all of that. Now, you were born 60 years ago or so.
Exactly.
And when you reached your draft age, Israel was after the Yom Kippur War and before the Lebanon War, now called the First Lebanon War. What made you join armor of all branches?
Well, first of all, from home, my father was a patriot, Israeli patriot, who admired the IDF, admired the officers of the IDF. And he supported all the time to, convinced me all the time to make the service real service and a very serious one.
Because you had other options?
Well, I didn't know. I wasn't so sure what I want. But when I was a little younger than the draft, 17, 16 years old, I used to read a lot, and I read the book of Yoni Netanyahu letters, and I read another book about the commando. And these two books influenced very much on my motivation to become a soldier and a serious soldier. I had a neighbor who was a general in the IDF, and all the spirit around our houses and our neighborhood were very patriotic. So when I recruited to the IDF, I wanted to become, as soon as possible, an officer. It was very important for me to become a commander. I admired the commanders, and when
a commander rather than a commando, because before the Yom Kippur War of 1973, the prestige of the Armor Corps was at its height. But after this war, not too many youngsters wanted to join armor.
Yeah, you're right. But I convinced that this is the right way to start a long career. And in 18 years old, I was thinking about a long career because of my neighbor, and he was an armor commander. So I decided to go to the armor, and I recruited the armor in 1980.
So, and 2 years later, you're already in a war.
Yeah.
And this is really, except for 2006, and we'll talk about that, but 1982 and the clash with Syrian armor is really the last time that the Israeli Defense Forces encountered a regular army on the battlefield. We haven't seen it for the last 40 years.
Yes.
What did you experience there?
Well, you know, the experience in Lebanon First Lebanon War, I was in the beginning of this war. I was a commander in the Hermon Heights. I didn't
on the Golan front.
Yeah,
not
I didn't
Lebanon.
enter in the beginning of the first week of the war, and the war lasts for 1 week, if I'm not mistaken.
This particular phase, because there was fear in Israel that the Syrians would join the war, and therefore the best armor division stayed on the Golan Heights.
Yes, and I was in the Hermon, and we were supposed to conquer the Syrian Hermon. and we had a program and we did exercises, and we had to start the conquering of the Syrian Hermon in Friday. And in 11 was the D-Day and the D-Hour.
But also the ceasefire.
But also the ceasefire, yes. And it was a very, very challenging operation. And I was planned to be the first tank that will conquer the.
But this is mountainous terrain. This is
Yes.
not tank terrain.
Yes, you're right. But the program was to conquer with infantry around the highest place of the Syrian Hermon, and then to enter the tanks. And that was the first tank that was planned to enter and to conquer. It was very challenging.
So you lost your moment of glory.
Yeah. Yes. So I entered in the second week to the First Lebanon War, and it was the starting of a war like the terror war that we face today. It was not a movement. After the first week, we maneuver very small part of the.
So why use tanks at all? This was, of course, against the Palestinian organizations.
Mm-hmm.
This was the beginning of Amal and Hezbollah, anti-tank squads, perhaps, mines, booby traps. Why use armored vehicles and especially tanks?
Well, first of all, that's what we had. That's the real.
You go to war with what you have.
Yeah, you go to war with what you have. I think that maybe this is the last war that we anticipated for something, and we got what we anticipated. The days after, the years after, we faced many other wars, and all of them were some kind of surprise. This was the last war that we practiced, we trained ourselves for a mountain kind of fighting with armor and infantry, and it was the war that we got.
It's interesting that Israel, small as it is, had both a desert front, at least in Sinai. This is the very time when Israel withdrew from the Sinai, but the armored divisions trained to fight there too, and also this northern mountainous and winter warfare, because while the war started in June, it got bogged down into wintertime, which is very harsh in Lebanon.
And I think that it answers to your last question, because the main threat that we anticipated then was Egypt, even though we started to become in peace, but we understood that it will take time, and the main wars are armor wars. So that's what we had. We didn't have the protection that we have now. We didn't have the
protection for the tanks.
For the tanks, we didn't have the fast technology and the fast, IT that we have nowadays in the tanks. But it was good enough for the enemy that we had.
This was the first time Israel employed the locally produced Merkava tank.
Yes.
Of course, it has American-produced engines, but the rest is produced in Israel. It entered service in 1979, and this was the first time it was tested on the battlefield. What were the results?
Well, I was not in Merkava then. I was in the Centurion then. But the results, I know it as years after that, I was the commander of the doctrine of the armor. All the wars, the Merkava was very good tank. We have now the fifth generation of the Merkava, and I think this is the best tank in the world, and I really familiar with the other tanks, and all the time it had some kind of advantage on the other tanks in the air.
The brilliant idea of the late General Israel Tal, which combined the moral and professional lessons, was to build a tank around the crew.
Yeah.
Because if the crew is hurt, is hit by another tank, it's useless anyway. And also you save lives. So you start from the idea that you have to protect the crew by the engine too, and not only the armor plates.
The driver is protected.
Very unique idea.
Yes, I think that Israel Tal was a real talent in the military arena, and he saw for very long distance what is going on, and he also anticipated that the anti-tank missiles will be the main threat in the...
But at first he believed that helicopters armed with anti-tank missiles will be the threat, but then you had anti-aircraft missiles which neutralized them.
Yes, but the threat on the tank is now maybe only the anti-tank missiles and the other explosions like the...
Is that because in tank versus tank warfare, if you outrange the other side and you draw first, like in the Wild West, right?
Yeah.
Whoever draws first wins.
Shoot first.
Right. Then you win. But the range that the anti-tank missiles have are now perhaps longer than what the tank has.
Well, I think that it's connected to this point, but it is also connected to the point that I think that the technology came to a point that it knows to protect against, against penetration of iron to iron. We know to protect with complicated materials. We know to protect it. We don't know, or we are not good enough in protect from the technology of the anti-tank missiles. That's why the anti-tank missiles, the range and the ability to penetrate almost everything is now in a very big advantage in the enemy's capabilities.
But regular shells shot by a tank cannot be electronically fooled, electronically deflected. While if the anti-tank missile is launched by someone who has to try and steer it towards the tank, they can be electronically taken care of.
Well, the technology haven't got the point that it knows to do it electronically. If you see the Meil Ruach,
windbreaker.
Yeah, I forgot the name of it, but the main protection system that we have now, and we sold to the American, Trophy. The name is Trophy.
The export version.
Yeah, the Trophy. We see that it's not electronically,
it's not EW.
Kill the threat, but it kills the threat physically. So it's the same way that we tried to kill the normal shells. But the normal shells, we didn't do it by kill it, but we did it by protect on the body of the armor.
You had a very fast career advance. When one looks at your CV, you had the command of a regular brigade in armor quite early, at least in our current terms.
Yeah.
Decades ago, officers got such command very early, but they also retired very, very early. And you took part in Operation Defensive Shield.
Yeah.
Which is usually known for what the infantry brigades did. But your brigade also took part.
Well, I was a brigade commander in Defensive Shield. It was after I came back from England, from RCDS, and it was one of the most challenging confrontation that we had in these years. When I thought that the armor brigade are not relevant as an armor brigade to this confrontation, I went to the commanders of the IDF. It was Shaul Mofaz, and Doron Almog was the South commander, and I told them that I want to become a commander with my forces and with other forces on the area of the central Gaza Strip, the central area of the Gaza Strip. And after a long debate and discussion, they approve it.
But this operation was cancelled. The operation within the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, it was cancelled, but I was responsible something like 6 months on the central area of the Gaza Strip.
And the northern and the southern brigades had paratroop or infantry commanders.
Yeah, but I had infantry troops. I had paratroop troops, and I had a little bit of armor in this.
But they seem that the Palestinians, it was Hamas mostly. They managed to have IEDs and cause a lot of damage to the Israeli tanks. This was about the same time that the Americans encountered such problems in Afghanistan and then Iraq.
Yes, well, the most damage that we had is from the IED that came beneath our armor vehicles.
Because this is the least protected part of the tank.
Yes, and the Hamas and the other Palestinians revealed this is our not strong point, and they use it very good.
The soft underbelly.
Yeah, but most of the threat there was a threat from terrorists that shoot on the civilians in the road. So we dealt most of the time in secure the roads, and dealt with terrorists all around the area of the civilians. In my first 120 days of commanding on this area, we had 120 confrontation with terrorists face to face.
So on the average, one a day?
One a day, 37 of them. I was the first one who met the terrorists in front of me.
Leading from the front?
Yeah, so it was a real infantry battle most of the time.
Now, out of this position, or the colonel position, as you said, you also led the doctrine department of the ground forces.
Yeah.
You were elevated to chief of staff of the Southern Command, and you had a central role in the withdrawal from Gaza.
Yeah.
But before you get to that, go back for a second to your studies in Great Britain, RCDS, the Royal College for Defense Studies. And obviously, England was probably the birth of armor with General Fuller and others. And here you come from Israel with your fresh experience. Did you teach them or did you study from them?
Well, the truth is that the Royal College of Defense Studies is a place for generals. It's not a place for not colonels and not brigade commanders and not battalion commanders. And the truth is that I was a colonel,
Lieutenant
colonel, and the IDF promised that I will become a full colonel during this year, and that's what happened. So I met 80 persons there, 80 members. 40 of them were Britons, and 40 of them were from other places in the world. But most of them were generals, lieutenant general, major generals, and diplomats from
Foreign Office.
yes. So most of the issues there were strategic issues about 8 areas in the world and their economic, security, and welfare challenges in every zone. It was not about armor or about any military maneuver or something like that.
In recent years, recent decades even, most senior Israeli officers who are groomed for higher command go to the United States to study. Yes. Did you have a chance to compare, when you got back, your experience in a British school with your colleagues from the American schools?
I had the chance to compare when I was the ground force commander. When I was the ground force commander, I sent part of the officers to the American institutions and part of them to the Royal College of Defense Studies. It's different. The experience of most of the schools in the United States are tactical schools that we send. We send much less to the strategic schools. And in England, we send to the strategic schools.
That's so Army War College or Quantico, the Marines?
It's more tactical. So it is hard to compare. They are both very good. What we used to do is officers that we see a little, long distance career. Those we thought that will be generals or something very senior, we sent to the Royal College of Defense Studies. The other we sent to the schools.
But also NDU, the National Defense University, is for colonels.
Yes. NDU is for colonels. NDU is strategic and tactical. I wasn't familiar with the program and the deep insight of this.
What were the challenges when in 2005, in the summer, now almost 18 years ago, Israel decided to withdraw from the Gaza Strip and evacuate some 8,000 settlers there. So this was not really a military operation, and it also had to do with the police handling some of it. But you were in the thick of business. You had, of course, the commanding general of the Southern Command above you, a major general, but you as a brigadier general had a key part. What were your duties?
Well, first of all, we must say that it was very different from a military operation, and the IDF said that the future is that the Hamas will control the Gaza Strip, and that the spirit there will be like it is today. It's a day-by-day war with the Gaza Strip, and we understood it, but the government decided, and we had to do it. We saw the first challenge is to prevent brothers' war.
Civil war against the settlers.
Yeah, this was the main challenge, and we dealt it with trying to find those who will start to think about violence or shooting against the policemen and the soldiers that were there. So we made 3 circles of intelligence soldiers and others in order to see if someone is thinking, let alone trying, to start violence. And my duty was to try to negotiate with the settlers and to become to a point that we agree about the fact that they will evacuate from the Gaza Strip and how they will evacuate. And I had a success in most of the settlements there, apart of one of them. And what you saw in the TV was some kind of production of me and of the head of the settlement of how any settlement will evacuate from their houses.
Now, our first conversation is coming to a close, but even though there were, of course, contradictions between your position as the IDF and the settlers, you had one thing in common. You didn't want it to look so easy that people will think that in the West Bank, such a withdrawal will also be easy to execute. There were no casualties. This operation finally succeeded with no one getting killed on either side. A very important point.
It's a big respect for that for the settlers. The settlers eventually were very responsible for their people and for the state of Israel, and they preserved their patriotism to Israel instead of
they complied with government policy eventually, even though they were against it and tried to resist it. General Guy Tzur, thank you very much. We will be back for another conversation very soon. This has been Watchmen Talk, and we will be back for another conversation with General Tzur.
For more of TV7's productions and editorials, we invite you to visit our website at www.tv7israelnews.com.